Ratchet and Clank Up Your Arsenal is considered by many to be the best in the franchise, and I can see why. This game introduced Dr. Nefarious, who became one of the most iconic villains in the series. Leveling up your weapons to the 5th tier made them more satisfying to use. Literally, I've seen very few people badmouth this game, so there was a small part of me that wanted to leave this one alone because I didn't really have anything new to say. But then I learned a couple of factors I hadn't known before. For instance, this game actually has a rushed development cycle, with a good chunk of it going to the online multiplayer. This surprised me considering how polished the single-player campaign felt to me. But as I set myself down to enjoy my third playthrough of this game, I noticed things I hadn't before. For all the haha funny jokes this game had, there was something that felt kind of empty, for lack of a better word. For all the amazing gunplay, it felt like it needed something like exploration per se. Don't get me wrong, I loved the third time through going into Up Your Arsenal. However, perhaps I could also see the birth of some of the issues that would be expanded upon in the future trilogy and beyond. At the end of the day, Ratchet and Clank Up Your Arsenal simply isn't as good as it used to be, and I'm here to explain why. So one of the biggest areas where you saw a major shift with Ratchet and Clank 3 are the themes. The previous two games had always contained some form of social commentary, most of them centering on the hardship within consumerist society. A lot of the NPCs would only give up items in exchange for a certain fee of bolts. Not only that, but many of the main antagonists in the previous two games often had their own capitalistic means to achieve their goals. For Drek, he wanted to keep taking chunks of other planets in order to fulfill his own selfish desires, veiled under the problem of overpopulation. For Mr. Fizzwidget, he gave false advertising that his proto-pet was a cute and cuddly product, when in reality it was an untested beast that ate its handlers. Not only was it able to show that children's media can cover deeper topics, it also demonstrated a sense of atmosphere within the Ratchet and Clank universe. A lot of these folks felt like they were just scraping by, while the higher-ups dropped nothing but breadcrumbs for them. Therefore, it was no surprise that the plumber would only give up to Infobot if you paid him. After all, he was sick of his socio-economic disparity. Now, if we were to look at how Up Your Arsenal takes all of that, it honestly doesn't do anything to build upon this. As a matter of fact, a lot of the themes within its predecessors don't seem to be present and are replaced with Saturday morning cartoon jokes. Now, quite a few of these give the game a lot of charisma and personality by how over-the-top they are. I mean, who could not love cross-dressing Quark? And, unlike a game like Crash to Insanity, Insomniac made use of self-awareness with the jokes they were making, whether it be Quark's disgusted look at the caller on the other line trying to hit on him, or Clunk shaking his head when he and Ratchet overheard a bit too much concerning Quark's, relationship status.
It was mating season. How could I have known she was your sister?
So yeah, Up Your Arsenal is probably one of the funniest games I've ever played, but where it ends up failing the most is the fact that there's no subtle message behind any of the jokes they're making. They're no longer trying to make a satire about the current societal systems. If there was a bigger theme that Insomniac seemed to be trying to convey, it was racism. Dr. Nefarious's whole evil plot seems to hinge on the fact that he wants to turn all organic life forms into robots. I mean, we don't really see any form of discrimination within the Ratchet and Clank universe. Dr. Nefarious talks about how for far too long they've been forced to be under the thumb of organic life forms, but we never see other robots complaining about this. In fact, the reason Nefarious hates organic life so much is because of his hatred for biology? Nefarious is so surface level compared to the other villains in the Ratchet and Clank universe. Drek at least had a big reveal of the true nature of his plans, whereas Dr. Nefarious is so obvious from the get-go. Up Your Arsenal seems to solely rely on the gags to carry the story forward. As a side note, was I the only person that thought there was some semblance of a 9/11 theme here? I mean, there is a moment where the galaxy is starting to lose hope, and the way it's presented, Dr. Nefarious sort of sounds like an Osama bin Laden, in which turning people into robots is like this game's version of terrorist attacks. I mean, Up Your Arsenal did release in 2004, and George W. Bush was president at the time. Add to the fact that this game has more of a military theme, and such a comparison isn't terribly far off. But even with this, the way the game talks about it isn't too in-depth. It's not that Ratchet and Clank had been a deep game to begin with, but making satirical commentary about consumeristic society isn't something you'd expect from a kiddie 3D platformer. And Ratchet and Clank 3 taking that away is kind of puzzling considering how well they handled it in the past. Talking about race relations is actually a good thing if you ask me, but go deeper with it. Don't make a bunch of jokes concerning it. That being said, for all the criticism I have of the game's thematic elements, most of these new characters are a lot of fun. Arnold Shimmerman's performance as Dr. Nefarious is very much spot on, and it always brought a chuckle to my face whenever Lance and Janice would play to interrupt one of his rants. This is a very clever feature to his characterization because it demonstrates the unhinged side of Dr. Nefarious. Lance and Janice episodes playing in his head subtly shows how not everything is sound with the old Doctor. His butler Lawrence is the exact opposite, and Insomniac uses this aspect to have the two bounce off one another. Therefore, he might do things like try to leave him behind as his Star Cruiser implodes, or even play a video of Dr. Nefarious's audition for Holostars. Maybe he just does this by accident, but I like to think it was on purpose to piss off his old boss. Seriously, if this didn't have you on the ground laughing, then you are one fucking cynic. Moments like these make me think that Insomniac threw all the pieces down without any rhyme or reason and tried to see what they could come up with. Usually humor isn't something you can elaborately plan out. Often it feels like one of those things that you just have to throw out against a wall and see what sticks, which is probably why you have so many comedians getting cancelled these days. The interaction between Dr. Nefarious and Lawrence have a lot of chemistry, and it makes me wonder if Lawrence at the very least wants the Q-Force to win, so that he could escape him. After all, towards the end of the game, he does seem rather joyful that Nefarious has failed. By whipping out the guitar and putting on the wig, he feels a level of freedom from the restraints of his boss. And it's just so funny because up to this point, you'd never expect him to do something like this. It just comes out of nowhere. And speaking of subverting expectations, the game brings back Captain Quark in a role that seems to distance itself from his past villainy. After briefly thinking himself to be a monkey in the beginning of the game, he returns to his superhero roots by being the leader of the Q-Force under the Galactic President. It's very funny how Quark explains a plan that usually involves Ratchet diving into a hell of a lot of danger while he just sits back and relaxes. It shows him to be a charlatan, a character with a lot of bombast, but not a lot of action to show it. The only time he actually manages to truly demonstrate his heroics is when he quits and later comes out of retirement to kick Dr. Nefarious's ass. He's definitely the character that probably has the most amount of development, almost to the point that the entire game centers around him. Even though the events of the original Ratchet and Clank and Going Commando are behind him, there are little hints that those days are haunting him. Ratchet and Clank obviously don't trust him, and he himself seems to still be chasing after some kind of former glory. In the original Ratchet and Clank, he wanted to be Drek's spokesperson. In Going Commando, he wanted to use the Protopet invasion to make himself look like the hero, and in Up Your Arsenal, he tries to ditch the Q-Force because his ego felt that his own life was more important than the people being turned into robots. Now, maybe his heel-face turn comes a little too quickly with one pep talk from Clank, but seeing him come out of nowhere to stop Nefarious was triumphant in the sense that he'd fully redeemed himself from his past misdeeds. On the other hand, his sidekick Scrunch doesn't really do much because, well, he's a monkey. The other members of the Q-Force can't understand him except for Quark and Clank. Usually these sidekick characters have the risk of being really annoying, but with Scrunch, they manage to make him likable despite his restricted screen time. I mean, how can you not love a one-eyed monkey in Captain Quark getup? Next we have Courtney Gears. Being a play on Britney Spears, she has this pop star edge that adds its own unique charm that hasn't been seen in a series before. To be honest, I'm not too familiar with celebrities, so there's not much I can say regarding how well they portrayed her as the real-life singer. As a character, she kind of just serves as a pop culture reference, almost as if Insomniac hoped that this would grant a chuckle out of their audience. I guess her arc is that she goes from being perceived as an innocent pop star to a secret crony for Dr. Nefarious' goal of robot domination. But it isn't really explored why she thinks like this, except through a music video that Ratchet and Clank stumble upon on DAX. Wouldn't it be cool if there was just a hint that she had been discriminated as a robot? Instead, we beat her in a boss fight, and that's the end of her. Similarly, the President is a reference to President Clinton. He gets like zero development, it only serves as the guy in charge of running the operation against Dr. Nefarious, although he later gives in by becoming half-robot. Like Courtney Gears, he's meant to serve as a pop culture reference and nothing else. It's not like there's anything wrong with these characters being parodies of real-life celebrities, but it kind of shows the start of where Ratchet and Clank started to become what it was satiring. In Up Your Arsenal, it was lighthearted enough that it was able to make people smile and laugh. It did a lot to provide personality to this game. However, when the future trilogy started to become more ham-fisted with it by changing the tone to make a Pixar-esque cinematic experience, it started to lose some of the old charm. You can watch my When a Series Becomes Too Different video for more information on how Tools of Destruction was a bad change. But anyway, if I were to talk about the other characters, there's not really much to say. The ones that returned from the first game are mostly the same. Al is still the biggest geek ever, Helga is still the tough-as-nails athlete that really puts her trainees to the test, Skid is that chill hoverboarder. They don't really have much screen time, but they're all as lovable as they were before. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I guess the newest addition to the line of protagonists is Sasha. Well, you know that character that just sits around and barks orders? That's her. Like, compared to Angela, who gets her hands dirty to stop the Proto-Pet invasion, and Talwyn, who's not nearly as good, but at least wields a gun and fights in the field, Sasha just doesn't do anything while she's on board with the Q-Force. I guess there's the fact she's the President's daughter, but this detail never served as an important plot line. But those are all the side characters. What about the dynamic duo of Ratchet and Clank? Well, I've gotta say, Ratchet feels like a nicer version of who he was in the first game. He's headstrong, determined, and generally only sees one way forward. Therefore, Clank is usually the one that has to provide him with an alternate perspective. When they first encounter Quark, and to see that he's been led to believe he's a monkey, Ratchet is the one to sigh in disbelief and states, "We're so screwed." Basically, he doesn't see any other way around this issue and wonders how they could possibly work with it. Clank, on the other hand, chuckles about how even Captain Quark needs a break from being a hero. Unlike Ratchet, he was able to at least come across as more forgiving towards Quark's bout of brain damage and believes there was a way to work around it. A similar thing can be seen when Ratchet and Clank learned that Quark was playing hooky and hadn't really died. Ratchet was so ready to dismiss him, but Clank didn't share such sentiments and believed that there was still good inside of Quark. Basically, Clank can see the bigger picture than Ratchet most of the time, which balances out Ratchet's headstrong nature. I guess another thing to note is that Clank has an alter ego known as Secret Agent Clank, and it's not really emphasized all that much except as a reference to a TV show. I guess it does play a part in the sense that Dr. Nefarious thinks that Secret Agent Clank is real, but they don't go any deeper than that. I guess it's sort of implied that Nefarious is upset his idol was just make-believe and didn't share his vision of robot supremacy. Maybe there could have been a rivalry between the two, which sort of manifests in a crack in time, but most of that potential screen time is stolen by Clank, and he's a nothing burger. He almost says that Quark's legacy was a load of bullshit before Ratchet cuts him off. I guess he signals to Nefarious that Ratchet and Quark were coming when they first confront him, and that's pretty much it. There's no attempt at sabotaging the Q-Force's plans or anything like that. Clank could have been an interesting character in the sense that he's like the evil version of Clank, not too dissimilar to somebody like Venom or Ultraman, but instead, his lack of actions kind of makes him a disappointment. But that being said, I think there are more good characters than bad, especially with the returning cast. Ultimately, the story leaves a lot to be desired, but the humor more or less saves it. While it wasn't taken to an extreme in Up Your Arsenal, the distancing from themes about consumeristic culture kind of was the beginning of the more cinematic experience the future trilogy lent itself. But of course, the narrative only makes up a third of the Ratchet and Clank experience. The real thing that a lot of people look forward to when playing these games are the guns. And yes, Up Your Arsenal has a diverse selection of weaponry that's only been improved upon by the level up system. However, there are some subtleties that were missed from its predecessors, namely the inclusion of the NPCs. Ratchet and Clank levels are often known to have branching paths that encouraged some form of exploration. On Planet de Mosul, you can either ride out the grind rails across the traffic jams or talk to the hypnotist. These two choices provide a level of excitement. Going on the grind rail section is fast-paced and really tests your reflexes, while meeting the hypnotist is a funny interaction considering that both he and his sock puppet seem to have their own individual personalities. Or take Novellis from Ratchet and Clank 1. You can either go down the normal route to meet the Galactic Prime Minister to get the coordinates from Metropolis, or go the off-beaten path to meet the plumber to get the coordinates to Aridia. Meeting these characters gives life to the planets. They don't feel like levels that you have to progress to the end. They actually are societies with inhabitants you get to know, and it's very interesting to see how Ratchet and Clank bounce off these different characters. So what does Up Your Arsenal do to expand upon this? Well, I wouldn't say that the different paths are completely absent. Planet Dax provides 3 directions to choose from. You can go down to back in the forest to get the charged brutes, you can go down the right way in the factory to fight the dropship and find info on the Bio-Obliterator, or you can go to the left and learn there is a connection between Dr. Nefarious and Courtney Gears. While it might not be meeting other characters, it at least provided different plot elements. The alternate paths on other planets only gave gadgets. Zildjian's secondary pathway provides the player with the Bolt Grabber. Quark's hideout has the PDA at the bottom of a gravity boot section. These don't feel like worlds to be explored, because you aren't meeting different inhabitants or discovering a new experience. To add more insult to injury, some of the returning planets have gotten a downgrade compared to their previous counterparts. Metropolis is now more straightforward, being standard in nature except for the Galactic Ranger missions. Gone are the obstacle course and Al's workshop. Likewise, Blackwater City can no longer be explored and has turned into an arena for the aforementioned missions. Yeah, these really replace the exploration of Ratchet 1 and 2 and give a more military-focused theme. They're solid in the sense that they accumulate into one big final task of taking out a huge Tyrannoid fortress, and it's always fun teaming up with the Rangers to shoot down hordes of enemies with all your weapons. Still, these are replacing the grind rail sections, space combat, and races from the second game. They could have built off those things instead of completely removing them. It's funny because the game gives you an option to customize your own ship, but why the hell would I want to do something like that if there's nothing to use the ship for? I guess it might be for the ship to look nice during the loading scenes, but it's still rather baffling. It's almost as if there was going to be some kind of space battle levels, but they were cut late into development. This means that for the most part, Up Your Arsenal is very bare-bones Ratchet and Clank gameplay. Thing is, they make this bare-bones gameplay the most polished it's ever been. With its stronger emphasis on combat, many of the planets will pit you against crowds of foes. Thankfully, a lot of the new weapons are able to deal with these situations. There's the Infector, which shoots out a green glob that makes enemies fight each other, which is very useful when the enemies are too overwhelming. The Spitting Hydra is like a more advanced Seeker gun in which it locks onto multiple targets and fires blasts of electricity. The Plasma Whip is probably the most creative addition since it's basically like a long-ranged wrench. Despite the area it covers, you're still forced to go into close proximity within the range of other enemies in order to properly use it to gain experience. While it's problematic to use in its original state, upgrading it to a higher tier fixes its issues. And yes, you're able to level up your weapons to the 5th tier. Some people really don't like the leveling system, since as soon as you max out your gun, there's no reason to use it again. However, I couldn't disagree more. You're still able to use your weapon at V5. Plus, the leveling up system makes it feel like the older weapons from previous entries are turning into newer versions of the same type. The Agents of Doom now fire lasers when they're upgraded, and some of them might fly by your side as Ratchet's bodyguards. The lava gun's upgraded version is completely different from what it was before, in the sense that it fires a streaming blast of hot liquid that freezes your foes instead of becoming whatever this fireball spitter was. The nanotech upgrade system also improves upon seemingly useless weapons. As I mentioned earlier, the plasma whip had an issue in which you'd get hit too easily by ranged attackers because of how close you'd have to get to them. Well, when you upgrade the whip, it lengthens and turns into a sizzling hot string of nitrogen that does more damage, which lessens the likelihood of Ratchet getting hurt when using it. Finally, the nanotech upgrade system gives more of an incentive to use your entire arsenal. In the first game, it was possible to get by using only one or two weapons, but I can guarantee even the most useless gun will be wielded out of curiosity to see what it becomes as it levels up. The hacking minigame returns. This time it's a little bit better implemented since you have to be quick in gathering the green code snippets while eliminating the red defense systems. Although, it still has the same issue of having to adapt to a completely different gameplay style. It's sort of a sudden break from the action. Interestingly, this is also used very minimally, so it sort of feels like a bit of an afterthought. The same can be said for the Tira guys. I thought it felt fast-paced, trying to press the correct button prompts at the right moment, and there's a sense of urgency when the Tyrannoids start to get suspicious of you, but this is only used in Aquatos and Mylon, which is like the beginning and ending of the game. The warp pad is even worse in the sense that you use it for exactly one level. I mean, it's a cool concept, being able to warp to different points you set up, but it's like the dev team introduced something, forgot it mid-game, and suddenly remembered it for the endgame. Now, one new feature that didn't suffer from this treatment were the Quark vid comics. These don't just provide a lot of lore for both Nefarious and Quark, but they're nice, bite-sized 2D platforming experiences. They have their own collectibles into Quark tokens, and collecting them all gives you a titanium bolt. Overall, they were kind of like Mega Man clones, considering that you went through a stage platforming and shooting. In a way, it doesn't deviate too much from Ratchet's gameplay, and there were a lot of funny moments regarding how the narrator and Quark would fight each other over the mic and exasperate one another.
Oh, please tell me this is a typo.
That's robotic pirate ghosts. Guess reading wasn't your subject, eh, Professor?
Right.
The arena challenges were also handled very well. The difference between Annihilation Nation from Up Your Arsenal and the Maktar Resort and Planet Jabba in Going Commando has to do with the former incorporating a more linear obstacle course in addition to the arenas, so there was a sense of variety with how they were presented. Still, in Ratchet and Clank 2, there were two different arenas, whereas in the third game, there's only one. And in the second game, sometimes they would switch it up by having Ratchet fight on the ceiling via gravity boots, whereas in this game, he was mostly grounded. Don't get me wrong, it was a lot of fun to mow down enemies with my mini turret guns and Agents of Doom, but this was a downgrade compared to what it once was in its predecessor, considering it seemed to carry less substance. But then there are the changes where I really don't know what Insomniac was thinking. Maybe there's a certain spectacle with the Inferno crate, considering Ratchet gets to wield dual wrenches while flames engulf his body, but this also prevents you from using your weapons for a period of time, so it was kind of lame. There are also these trophies scattered around the world, and these were redundant since this game already has skill points and titanium bolts, so trophies were just another collectible that were just kind of there. Also, while Slim Cognito is present in this game, none of the upgrades from Going Commando are, so the titanium bolts are simply used for buying skins now. I just collected them because of OCD, but it would have been nice if there was an extrinsic reward for getting all of them. Finally, there's the sewer crystal hunting. This is basically the exact same as the desert crystal farming, however, whereas the Tabora Desert was more open, the sewers of Aquatos are linear. When you get the gravity boots, sometimes you'll find alternate paths on the ceiling, but even then it feels enclosed. Plus, it got really tiresome fighting the same amoeboids over and over. That seems to be the general theme behind Up Your Arsenal. Just this lack of exploration. And that's a shame because from the way these levels looked and sounded, they had potential to be more. The Florana jungle is dense with a lot of vines and undergrowth hanging around everywhere. Quark's space is icy cold and bleak, which reflects the solitude of the superhero that has given up. All of these cool designs are accompanied by a banging soundtrack by David Bergeau. The Starship Phoenix has an OST that gets you pumped up and excited. It feels just as grand and awesome as Sasha had described when first introducing it. The Zeljan Starport theme makes me think that I'm about to pull off a heist, which is fitting because this was supposed to be the ultimate infiltration of one of Dr. Nefarious' bases. It also signified the first time we meet Nefarious, so the fast-paced music kind of supplements that build-up to that initial confrontation. Planets that focused on military operations like Iridia have a lot of bombast to them with the blaring trumpets and flute solo that plays in the middle of the song. It creates this sense of urgency, which is fitting considering that when you're trying to suppress an invasion at your doorstep, you really have a lot going on in your mind. On the other hand, planets like the Albani Gemini are tempered and slower, which allows them to convey an atmosphere that is quieter. This is a level with a lot of empty space, and the music helps show how desolate everything is within this area. From the slow-moving asteroids and the sparse enemies, it creates a chilling sensation, and a less dramatic OST bolstered that. It was too bad that we didn't get to spend a longer time in these levels, considering there isn't a whole lot to be explored. In fact, the best way to describe Up Your Arsenal is that technically it's very impressive, but at the same time, it lacks its predecessor's personality. The gunplay is the best it has ever been, the jokes are funny, but consumeristic themes are missing, the sense of taking different paths on a planet is gone, all the subtleties are no longer there, and as much as I hate to say it, this was a preview of what was to come with the future of the series. But all that being said, before you guys pull out the pitchforks and try to kill me, I am very fond of Up Your Arsenal. Even though I encountered the PS2 classics as an adult, mind you, I still have good memories playing this on my PS3 while laughing at the jokes and having so much fun blowing shit up with the Galactic Rangers. 2023 was a shit year for me, and, this might sound cheesy, this game provided me something to look forward to in an otherwise dreary existence. However, if I were to remove those nostalgia-blind goggles and look at the bigger picture with how this game fits in the grand Ratchet and Clank franchise, it honestly has some serious issues. It's still a great game that's definitely worth playing, but it isn't the spectacle that it once was in 2004, and I know I probably pissed off a lot of people right now. A lot of things that I complained about with Up Your Arsenal would eventually be translated into a worse version with the PS3 Future Trilogy and beyond. It's really sad to say that the pinnacle of the franchise was the beginning of the end for the series, if you know what I mean. But what do I know? I'm just a young man trying to make it through life. Let me know what your thoughts are of Up Your Arsenal, and tell me why you disagree. This is Dave Reviews, signing out.